Derelict houses with peeling paint and broken windows. Derelict buildings looking like life had been hard on them. They always reminded Sisi of drug users who had aged before their time. Scars of hard living crisscrossing their faces like mosquito netting. Sometimes, Sisi thought, stepping over a mound of brown stool, Antwerp seemed like a huge incinerator. She walked along the Pelican Straats and toward the central station. As always, here were drunks with eyes like quarter moons and throats full of stories. A middle-aged man with a long beard accosted her. He reeked of liquor, and beside him, a shaggy-haired dog, fat like some medieval suzerain's eunuch, stood with its tongue out, dripping saliva. The man held out a calloused palm. As-tu bien eat for me? No Dutch, Français, Deutsch, Espanol, English? You've got €1 for me, just €1, boss fare, please. I just lost my wallet. Sisi fished in her pocket and gave him a coin. She was in a good mood. She walked across the station and made her way to the Kaiserlei, joining the throng of people that Antwerp spewed out every day. It was as if the earth itself cracked open and was hurling people onto the streets. Black, yellow, white, and some a brilliant hue caused by a mixture of all three. The city tickled her senses, and for the first time in a long while, she felt thrilled to be alive. No longer buffeted by indecision, she felt at ease with the world. No more promises of happiness that crumbled and turned to dust under scrutiny. Today was the beginning of a brand new day, of a brand new life. She headed to the mayor. In front of her, a sea of shops spread out, beckoning to her like long-lost friends. She smiled to herself and tried not to think about her housemates back on this Rochester, probably wondering where she'd gotten to. What would they say when they found out? She stifled any insurgent feelings of guilt. She ignored the shops she normally would have entered, the superstores that looked like massive warehouses with clothes so cheap that with €20 she had once bought 3 new outfits. The imitation leather miniskirts that she wore a lot in the winter, a matching jacket, a turquoise cotton kaftan and matching trousers, and the long black polyester dress with an open back and a very low neck that was her coup de grace for difficult clients. Today, she would enter other shops. She would walk down the Mayor and enter shops she previously avoided. She walked into a boutique and spent an extravagant €75 on a pantsuit. She held the grey plastic bag of the shop in such a way that its name showed. She swung into a lingerie shop with a chic name she couldn't pronounce, and a shop assistant with spiky hair and a silver stud in her tongue. €50 went on 3 pairs of knickers. They were nothing like she wore for work. Thongs with frills and laces, huge bows suggestively trailing the front. These were sensible, the sort she imagined a school teacher would wear, black and brown and cream, elegant, prim and proper, like the queen's. After a day spent in shops, she walked back to the train station, filled in a Western Union money transfer form, and sent €300 to her parents. Sisi's purse was lighter. Her head, turning with an unaccustomed dizziness that made her feel immortal. The money was spent and she couldn't retrieve it. There was no turning back now. She had defied delay, cut all links with Madame and the house on the Zwarte. She was ready to deal with whatever the consequences might be. And then I'm going to read a very short, this isn't exactly an extract. I've condensed the story, so it reads like one story, but it's a lot longer than it is. So I'm working on a collection of short stories dealing with the immigrant experience in Belgium, but the illegal immigrants, so the marginalized of the marginalized. When Godwin came home with his wife, his sisters hid their faces behind their hands as they said, "We're happy to meet you." He could hear their laughter bubbling underneath like a boil about to burst. Godwin had told them on the phone that she was not beautiful, but he'd said nothing about her corpulence or that her teeth looked like fingernails. "Couldn't you find anyone better?" his mother asked him later that night while the new wife slept. "If she grew her hair, she might look better." "Perhaps," Godwin agreed, "but I didn't marry her for her looks." "Yes, but even then, this Tina, how do I show her off to the other women, eh?" You don't have to show her off at all, Godwin snapped. Did anybody think he was happy with the way things were? Some men liked a bit of flesh, something to hold on to, but the padding on his wife suffocated him. When they made love, as needs must, he felt claustrophobic. She looks like a whale naked, he thought, and this thought made him snort out a little laughter. He said, I'll marry a nice woman for you, Mama, a fine one. When? When will you marry a proper wife? When this is all over, he said, waving a hand into the air. 1 more year and I become a citizen. He'd gone first to Cyprus because it was easier to get into from Nigeria, then Spain, and then Belgium where he was determined to stay. When he met Tina, he held on to her. In bed, when she whispered her fears that she was fat, needed to lose weight to keep his love, he touched her breast and told her, I like my women with fat on them, baby. Halfway into their vacation, Godwin's grandmother arrived from the village carrying a sack of mangoes. She asked in a loud voice for the new wife. Nobody had told her that Tina wasn't a real wife, and now Godwin felt guilty at her enthusiasm. He sent for Tina, who came out of the room, her face and bare arms flushed pink, putting Godwin in mind of a giant pig. The old woman spread her arms and made rapid movements like a bird flapping its wings. Then she hugged Tina and spoke in Igbo into her ear. Releasing her, she said, our Godwin has brought us back a real woman, a beautiful woman. Her skin shines like a polished wall. For the rest of the day, she sat with Tina in the sitting room eating mangoes. Tina cupping her chin with her left hand, the same way the woman did to catch the juice dripping from the fruit. The grandmother spoke in Igbo, and Tina spoke in Dutch, and they both laughed that they could not understand each other. Tina's laughter tinkled through the room, and at that moment, Godwin felt a stirring in him that he thought might be the beginning of love. Thank you.
I have a very simple, basic question to start with. How did you end up moving and living in Belgium?
When I was at uni, on a Friday night, some very good-looking, tall Belgian guy came into my room and asked me if I wanted to go for a party. I said yes, and the rest is history.
That's fantastic. That's the best answer you can give. How about becoming an author? One thing about this book, on Black Sister Street, that sounded, it sounds very intense. Like the whole idea of those women that are coming from Nigeria that pay 30,000.
Well, when I did my research, because I started writing on Black Sister Street, I think in 2004.
Okay.
And when I did my research, the asking price was 30,000 euros, and now it's 60,000. So that's the list that the pimps ask.
Wow. So the idea is just to explain that pimps ask for 30,000 now, 60,000 euros to get transport from Nigeria to Antwerp, to Europe, in this case Antwerp, where the women will work as in the red light district and pay back a certain amount, to pay off that 30,000 euros, and pay off like
freedom. Yeah, so basically they have to buy their freedom by paying off the debt.
How did you come to write about this?
I come from a very conservative Catholic home, and I remember being young and really wanting to sing certain songs like Salt and Pepper's Let's Talk About Sex. And I could never use the word sex because my mother wouldn't let it, so I had to use bread. So let's talk about bread, baby. And then coming from that sort of background, suddenly to living in Belgium, where no matter what time of day, if you take the train and you go past Brussels North, you'll see prostitutes in front of the display windows. Right. So it was a huge cultural shock for me. And then when I realized that many of the African ones in Antwerp were from Nigeria, I became even more intrigued. So this was basically curiosity. I wanted to know why and how and all of that.
It's very amazing. One of the things that I didn't mention in reading your bio, but you've won a ton of prizes, it seems, in a very short period of time, including being shortlisted for the Kane Prize for African Fiction and winning the BBC Short Story Competition and a Commonwealth Short Story Competition Award. And the thing that stood out in reading this, because the book originally came out in the UK, right?
It came out last year in the UK.
Yeah.
It's just, it came out in August in the US.
Right, exactly. But it seems like you've gotten a lot of attention in the UK and just starting to get the books out here in the US. What do you think the reason is for that? Is there any particular reason?
I think it's a good book.
Yeah, well, I just think it's a great book. It's interesting that it went through that path.
Sorry, what was the question?
Why do you think the UK has paid so much attention?
Well, I don't know. I mean, apart from the fact that I think it's a good book, I think the subject matter is interesting as well.
Oh yeah,
The African prostitutes in Europe is like a huge phenomenon, but nobody's ever written about them before. I mean, there was a book in late 90s by a Ghanaian writer called Amadako, but it was a lot less, I don't know, intensive than this. And I mean, actually, because I wanted to get the characters right, and I also wanted to be able to be, I'm not very good at empathy or imaginative empathy. I have to be able to put myself in the setting to be able to recreate it a lot more faithfully. And so I think it was 2005, 2006, I decided that to be able to write about these prostitutes truthfully, I had to actually go there. And so I put on a miniskirt, high heel boots, and I went to the red light district and I sort of mingled and talked to them. And they thought I was a prostitute as well.
That sounds pretty interesting. And how did that go?
Sorry?
How did it go?
It went okay. I mean, I concentrated primarily on the black prostitutes, and they were mainly Nigerians, and they were incredible. I mean, they were incredibly open because they thought I was a prostitute. They thought I was a wannabe, sex worker. So there's a huge solidarity as well, and I sort of benefited from that. And I mean, one of the first girls, prostitutes I spoke to, I told her I was doing research for a book, and she sort of just burst into laughter because she couldn't. In her reality, you can't be black, you can't be Nigerian, you can't talk like her, live in Belgium and be writing a book. So it was just easier to, when she said, yeah, I'm sure you're a new girl. So I just said, yeah, and sort of took off from there.
Wow. And that was an amazing thing too about that your book was your first novel was the first book of fiction published by Flemish author of African origins. It's kind of astounding and amazing that happened. I don't have any other comment other than that. It's kind of shocking in a way, and just kind of interesting that came about. And in a way, congratulations.
Thank you.
The other thing I was going to ask you, in the part that was excerpted in the New York Times, there's a lot of dialects in the sections. What were you doing with the dialect? I mean, it's a very risky thing and very interesting to use in fiction because it helps you hear it in a way, but it's also visually stimulating. What were you trying to do with that?
I come from Nigeria, which has a colonial history, and if you went to good schools, you weren't allowed to speak your local language. For example, you had to speak English. So this, in a way, is my way of subverting that, of being a bit rebellious.